So as it says on the page there, one way of avoiding sounding old hat when you're using diatonic chords is to alter the chords just slightly. It doesn't mean making them all seventh chords, because then you're going to sound old-fashioned, like you're playing an old jazz tune, or you're going to sound too hip if you alter those and enhance those jazz chords. But a lot of modern writers will take a typical chord progression and they'll just take a chord like a D and they'll suspend the D, meaning they'll raise the third up to the fourth, or they'll lower the third down to the second. And of course, a ton of older guitar tunes do that little turnaround using the suspended D and the lowered second, the sus2 chord. But it's really just an ornamentation. They're not really using that as the chord. Another thing that's common, the third most common thing, is to take the root, raise it a whole step, but leave the third in the chord. And of course, what makes these chords sound pretty without sounding too jazzy is the dissonance involved. The dissonance between the second and the third in that case, which goes away when you add the fifth below it, and goes away even more when you add the root below it. Right? The sus4 doesn't really have that dissonance. However, if I played an inversion of that sus4, so here's a D chord, here's an inversion of it, 1, 3, 5, if I made it 1, 4, 5, then I have that dissonance between the fourth and the fifth. If I played the other inversion, 3, 5, 1, you've got the 4 and the 5 together. And of course the sus2 has the dissonance here. I'm calling that a sus2 chord because there's been some debate. Different sources on the internet will tell you that a 2 chord is a chord that has no third in it. That's my opinion from a lot of big band charts that I've played. But there are also people who feel that the 2 chord includes the third in it as well. So if the third is present, I'm going to call it an add 9 chord, if the third and the second are present together. And that can be major or minor. There's a D minor with an added 9, hard voicing to play, so I use an open string. For a 2 chord without the third in it, I'm going to call it a sus2, even though you're not suspending this third, you're lowering it. So sus makes more sense. If a chord just says sus, they mean play the fourth instead of the third. You're suspending the third. But certainly in Baroque writing and classical analysis, you can have such a thing as a 2-3 suspension, where the chord doesn't resolve right away. It happens at the end of country tunes as well. Anyway, so you're adding something beyond the third of the chord so it doesn't sound so traditional like an old Bob Dylan tune. And so suddenly you've got a 1, 4, 5 progression. So that's a reason to use this stuff. You don't necessarily have to make your chord progression more interesting. So see if you can find tunes that have these sus or add chords in them. Now certainly those old, Pete Townsend, Tom Petty, American Pie, Don McLean sort of tunes have that. But ones that use them a lot more, again, are some of the composers we've mentioned before, like Sting. But a specific case that should be mentioned is the great group Steely Dan. One founding member passed away last year, Walter Becker. Along with Donald Fagen, they wrote all this amazing music, and it has several jazzy chords and certainly a jazz influence, but also, blues, R&B, Motown influence in their music. But one chord that is prevalent throughout is the add 9 chord. Oftentimes, here's the add 9 in root position. Right? If I was to put the third in the bass, that voicing, real common in a lot of Steely Dan music. That's the third, the root, the ninth, and the fifth. Right? So it's a sus2 chord, but by putting the third in the bass, it really becomes an add 9 chord. If I go up to the, again on guitar, even though the signature sound of that chord is Donald Fagen's keyboard, a Rhodes piano, for instance. But there's the major 7 on top, so that becomes a major 9 with a third in the bass. And so they did them in root position, but oftentimes that first inversion sound, in fact, they came up with a name for it called the mu major, after the Greek letter mu. And there's an entire website that I've linked to here that you can study the history of that. It has little sound bites of all those great Steely Dan tunes, like Reelin' in the Years and Ricky Don't Lose That Number, Deacon Blues, Peg, so many others that use the add 9 chord, which again they make it sound like it's some sort of magical chord, but it's just an add 9 chord. But it's still cool. A guy named Howard Wright had that website. It's still a good source of information. So check that out. That voicing.